Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. For those of you who just joined us, again, thank you so much for um, tuning in this evening for this month's edition of our Real World Parenting series. Um, I'm Pam Evans. I head up the marketing and development here at Family Service and Guidance Center in Topeka, Kansas. As you may know, FSGC specializes in treating all ages of kids who may be dealing with some sort of mental health issue like anxiety, depression, that we're going to talk about tonight, ADHD, and a whole host of other challenges, behavioral issues. We are super, super pleased to be offering these free workshops because we know parenting is no easy task, especially right now. So we really hope that you can take away some information and some tips that you can put into action in your household that just kind of help your kiddos, no matter what age they are. A couple of housekeeping things. Please note we are, as I mentioned, recording this. We will post the recording as well as the PowerPoint. So please don't feel like you have to take pictures of it or, write everything down. We will post that tomorrow by the end of the day on our website. And that is fsgctopeka.com. And I will repeat this towards the end, fsgctopeka.com/parenting. So wanted to let you know that as well. And for those of you who need a certificate of attendance for this workshop, please, if you could put in the chat function of Zoom, most of the time it's in the bottom of your screen, if you could type in your first and last name and just put certificate. We will make sure we get that emailed over to you yet this week as well. Again, for those of you who just joined us, thank you. Thank you. Please make sure you keep yourself on mute. That way we've got a short amount of time, and I know Sarah's chomping at the bit to share information with you this evening. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Sarah Bubna, who is, and I hope I pronounced that right. Sorry if I just, destroyed that. She is one of our amazing school-based case manager. And she's going to share lots of information about how you can help your child cope with depression. So Sarah, take it away.
Thank you, Pam. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Good? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I usually talk pretty loud and fast, so I'll try to just talk loud tonight so that you can keep up with me. As Pam said, I do case management, and I get a lot of questions about what case management is. So my job is to work with therapists. A lot of time when, kids or teens come here for therapy, they're having the therapy services, and then there might be additional help that they need, support at home, in the community, or at school. And so my job is to kind of take those things that we're working on in therapy and then in kind of real time and practical way, help the kids work on those. So I do a lot in schools because schools are a pretty big stressor for a lot of the kids that we work with. So that's usually what case management looks like. Sometimes I help coordinate between teachers and families just to make sure that the students are getting the support that they need. So tonight is going to be an overview. You're welcome to ask any specific questions that you think of. Pam's going to be monitoring the chat, and we can talk about those at the end. Just know that depression is different for each person. And so, we might not be able to answer a totally specific question about your child, but, we'll do our best to make sure you feel equipped. And the goal really is to just help you feel more confident about recognizing the signs of depression in your child or teen or grandchild, niece, nephew, student at school, and that you'll maybe feel better able to kind of support what's going on for them. So I do want to say, first of all, as I work with students, I work with their families, and mom guilt, dad guilt, caring adult guilt is real. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves at times to know everything that our child thinks and feels. And so I wanted to just say, if as we go through tonight, you think, how did I miss these signs in this kid that I see all the time? I miss these red flags. You are not alone in that. I think sometimes when you spend a lot of time with the child, you are the expert on them. And so in some ways, you're the best person to see changes in their behavior, but then sometimes we're very close to them. And it can be difficult for us to kind of see that. And so I think that's a takeaway from the families I work with a lot, that like, I can't believe I missed this. So don't feel guilty. We're going to work on, just you feeling better about how to handle that. I think it's hard, to be honest, with children and specifically with teens. Some of the symptoms of depression can really be difficult to see. I mean, teen angst, kind of pushing away sometimes from family, wanting to do things on their own, moodiness, hormones. Some of those are just common to teenagers. And so sometimes it can feel like, well, is that depression or is that just them going through a phase? So we're hopefully going to talk about that a little bit. So I think one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about first is, what do we think about depression? Because some of what we think and what we know affects the kids that are in our lives. I think most of us have had some experience with depression, whether we have dealt with it, a family member, a friend who's dealt with it. So sometimes we have ideas in our head of what that looks like. And then if it's kind of, we're not seeing those things in our child, well, it's probably not depression. So we're going to talk about how it looks a little bit different with adults and kids. And some of those things are the things that we think are true, that, there are times when people struggle to get out of bed or they're crying a lot. But those are part of depression. Those are things we see in movies, things we've experienced. And so those are real, but there might be other things that we haven't thought of. So I think even if it's confusing to us, it's something kind of worth exploring so that we can find out whether that is depression in our child. So I'm not going to get too scientific with you tonight. That's not my area of expertise. But I did want to show, this slide is a scan of, different brain images there. It's, depression is something we feel on an emotional level, but in our bodies, in our brains, we do experience it on a neurological level. You can see here that, someone with depression, there's a lot of different less activity going on in their brain than someone who doesn't have depression. And so, neurologically, what happens with depression, here it just shows that, we've got some neurotransmitters, basically, which are what our brain uses to send signals. So for not someone who's normal, but that someone who's not experiencing depression, there's a lot of activity. Those signals help us regulate our mood. But what research has found is that someone with depression has a lot less of that happening in their brain. So it's part of what makes it difficult for them to regulate their mood. One way, when it says treatment here, a lot of times with treatment, we think medication and therapy, and those are treatments. And that those have been shown, to kind of help sometimes produce more of those chemicals in the brain. And we'll talk more about treatment later. This is just to kind of give you an overview. But there's other things too, even in the brain. We found that stress can contribute to low levels of some of the neurotransmitters. So sometimes a child experiencing a lot of stress, what's going on in their brain and then how they're acting can be very similar to if they have depression. And so the last little scientific bit I'll give you here is that the hippocampus, part of our brain, releases a hormone called cortisol. And so when we're stressed, or if we're experiencing an episode of depression, the brain kind of gets flooded with the cortisol, and that kind of slows the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus. So if that continues to happen over time, if we have stress for long periods of time, a long period of depression, it actually can shrink that part of the brain, which can cause like some memory issues for us. So I just wanted to point that out to show that, physiologically what happens in our body in our brain can affect other behaviors, lack of memory. It can cause sleep disturbances. So when we see some of those things, in the child or teen that we love, that, it can be part of what's going on kind of physiologically. Let's see. So the next thing I want to talk about is kind of what are the factors that research has shown contribute to depression. And the first one there being trauma. This I find is sometimes difficult for us as adults to know what has maybe been traumatic for kids in our lives. I think all of us have gone through things. And sometimes we think, well, I dealt with, my parent dying when I was young, or a very big trauma, and they haven't had to deal with that. So it couldn't possibly be that this is affecting them. And I think the takeaway for that is to realize that everyone experiences trauma and very difficult things in life differently. So something that we might view as not that big of a deal, maybe what we call a little T trauma, could be larger for someone else. So maybe just to kind of keep an open mind about that. Unfortunately, I know this again can be tough as parents and caregivers, but genetics is a factor. And in talking with different families, I think sometimes it can be difficult as the adult, as the parent, to know that, if you've struggled with depression, or it's in the family, that's something that your child might have to deal with. We kind of know that first degree family members, nuclear family members who have depression, the risk factor for children is 2 to 4 times more likely with that. And actually females are, they think 2 to 3 times more likely than males to develop depression as well. So just to, not to say that if you have if you have depression, you have a teenage daughter, they're definitely going to have it, but those are good things to keep in mind, that child just might have higher risk factors with genetics. One of my professors in school, we would talk about how there's environmental stressors and genetics, and his idea, the way he expressed it, I don't like gun analogies, but it's one he used, that genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. And so that, you might have a genetic predisposition to depression in your family, but you might not experience environmental factors that bring that to fruition. But you also might. So there's definitely 2 parts of it there. We also know, I guess what I wanted to say about environmental stressors, I don't want to skip over that. Those are things that are sometimes different for us. I'm guessing most of the people on here, we did not grow up in an era, when I was growing up, there was internet, but, barely we had internet and access to social media. And so that's something that kids really have to deal with a lot these days, a lot of, online bullying, a lot of pressure about social media, things that we sometimes we're like, oh, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Just not a big deal. But they might really experience that as a big deal. So just trying to be open-minded about that sometimes what isn't important to us can be really important when you're 13, 16, 17 years old. I think also, we talk about like recent losses, that someone might be having, there might be depression, but versus bereavement or grief. If they had a really big loss, it, might not be that they're depressed, but experiencing grief, crying a lot, some of those same things. I think COVID has been really tough. I mean, just speaking for myself personally, I never think about my high school graduation or my high school prom. I went to them, they were fine, I've moved on. But in talking with some of the high schoolers I work with, I mean, they were devastated last year. We didn't get our prom, we didn't get graduation. So I think as adults, we can feel like, again, oh, that's no big deal. It's, high school graduation, whatever. But just recognizing that for them might be this huge loss that we think like, that's not a big deal, but it might be really difficult for them to kind of deal with. So those are things that can really contribute to those, to the depression. Seasonal changes. I think a lot of us have heard of seasonal affect disorder, which is its own disorder, but just that the weather, some of those things can really affect people's moods as we get into the colder weather. And I think especially with this year, looking at, we've all been kind of restricted at home or more restricted in what we do. And then if we have cold weather, we're stuck with some of the things that we like to do. If we like to go outside and be active, that can be hard to do. So seasonal changes, can be a big part of it. And then substance use. Hopefully this isn't as big of an issue if you have a 9-year-old that is the child you're caring for, versus teenagers. And so, in working with teens, there are quite a few teens that use, alcohol and other substances to kind of cope with some of the feelings of depression. But we know that alcohol itself is a depressant, and different drugs can kind of change the brain chemistry. So that's kind of important to know that can really actually make things worse. A teenager might think it's making it better, but it's really kind of making that worse for them. And so just some stats to see there that, if we know that approximately 7% of adults struggle with depression, it's a little bit higher with children and teens. Part of that might be that research has shown that with therapy and different treatment, that kids can kind of go into remission, almost, for lack of a better word, and that it might not be a lifelong thing for them. It might be kind of in episodes. So that is potentially why it might be a little bit higher in kids and then goes down a little bit with adults. Like I said, it's twice as common in females as males. Some of that might be hard to know. Might be cultural, that we are acceptable. It's acceptable for a woman to cry or to express sadness, and maybe less so for men. So that some of the behaviors and things that we see might just be less. We might see them less in males, but they are there. And then that depression is the most likely to occur between 18 and 25, 18 and 29. So just to keep those in mind, as those are, again, just things to help look for. It doesn't mean that, a 9 or 10 or 11-year-old couldn't be experiencing depression, but just that the highest prevalence of it is when they're a little bit older. And so this part is just, specific things to look for. But I want to tell you that when I first started learning about depression, this felt very frustrating to me. It's like, how can too much sleep be a symptom of depression, but also too little sleep, or eating too much, but not eating enough? I mean, it felt, just frustrating, I guess, that these things that feel very different from each other could both be, symptoms of depression. Weight loss, weight gain, loss of energy, a loss of interest in things that before interested your child. I know that can be a little difficult with kids, because sometimes they're like, well, this week I'm really into Legos, and then the next week they're into trucks. But I think we're talking more about things that you really used to bring them a lot of pleasure, and then we see a pretty big decrease with that, in maybe a shorter period of time, rather than like they're outgrowing their Legos over 5 years, but more that like, that doesn't, I used to love that, but I'm just not into it anymore. Lack of ability to concentrate. I think a kid's also expressing, like we have on here, low self-esteem, worthlessness, but even thoughts about dying and death. And some of those are normal questions that kids ask. But I think maybe if that's something that comes up more, I guess what I would say here to make it a little less confusing is what feels major to your child, what feels really different for them than you've seen before. Because maybe you already have a kid who they're not socially that engaged. So social withdrawal is not going to be a sign for them. But what if they normally have a great appetite and then it totally changes, they're not eating at all, then for your kid, that's kind of something different. And like I said, some of these are normal parts of growing and developing. It can make them really difficult to see. So again, I don't want you to feel guilt if, there's things here that you missed. And I think one thing when I've worked with parents is they are like, I can't believe I missed it. The school had to call me and tell me. Don't feel bad if you're not the first person who saw it in your child. We're working, hopefully the goal is that we're working together here as a case manager, a school social worker, a grandparent, a teacher, that it's not for you to feel bad that you didn't notice it first, that hopefully, you can gain some support from other people, that are noticing it and wanting to help. And again, it can be hard to know what's depression. A kid being irritable or angry, which can come with a depression, can feel like them just being disrespectful. And they also might be having depression and being disrespectful. So those things can be happening at the same time. Low energy or a lack of interest might just look like them being kind of lazy. So it is really difficult sometimes with kids to kind of assess these out. And I think it's good to remember that kids and teens really can struggle to express themselves verbally. So they're not always good at telling us what's wrong or what they're feeling, but they might have this crazy outburst of anger and we're like, whoa, where'd that come from? Well, if we think about their behavior as them trying to tell us something, then we kind of sometimes see it differently. Like, well, they're trying to express something here. They might not have the words to tell us what it is. So on this slide, it's kind of just showing that we have, that there's the emotions that go with depression. There's the thoughts. There's kind of, again, those physical symptoms that we talked about, and then some of the behavior that we might see. And these are kind of all tied together there. One thing that on the emotions is the guilt. I think there are kids that I've talked to that feel a lot of guilt about being depressed. They'll say, like, I don't even have anything to be depressed about. I didn't have a parent die. I didn't have this major thing. Like, I don't even know what's wrong with, I feel terrible that I feel this way. So I just wanted to, to put that out there as, I think, as the adults in their life, for us to kind of support that, them feeling guilty, like, I don't have anything to be depressed about. Like, that's okay. This might be something that for them is genetic and has less to do with the environmental factors. And with the thought part of it too, I just to remind us that we don't see the thoughts unless they're expressing these thoughts, the self-criticism, that they might not be remembering things, thoughts of death and suicide. Unless they tell us those things, these are sometimes things that we don't even see. So I've had several different families that I work with, like what came out for them to recognize that their child had depression was them kids writing things down in their English class, like doing journals. And then all of a sudden the teacher's like, whoa, we've talked a lot about death and dying here, because those aren't thoughts we probably normally talk with our family about or our friends. They feel a little bit off limits. So we might put it in an English journal versus like talking about it. So just a reminder that sometimes the thoughts aren't what we see. Sometimes we really, with kids and teens, see the physical changes and then also like the behavior part of it. So with the next thing I would say on here, just a slide that kind of shows some of the symptoms and then kind of some of the things we can practically do. But I'm going to say this like 3 times. First of all, I think the biggest one to take away from there is to see the doctor. So there are different things, vitamin D deficiency, anemia, some of those things that kids can be going through in their bodies can actually mimic symptoms of depression. ADHD, there's definitely different things that I think it's important for your doctor to assess and rule out. And I know sometimes finding a great doctor can be really difficult. We might have a good one, our insurance doesn't cover them. We don't have insurance right now. I would ask, if you don't have a good doctor or aren't sure, if your child goes to school, to public school, I would reach out to the school social worker. A lot of times they have really good resources for low cost care, and they might have some good recommendations for physicians that really specialize with kids. And if your child's in therapy, sometimes a therapist might know somebody or have a good recommendation as well, because it is very difficult to find a good doctor. But I think it's important to kind of, what we want to do on here is just eliminate some of these variables. And had kids that weren't sleeping, kids that went to sleep when their mom said, and then wake up in the night to get on a tablet and play games for 4 hours. Well, no one knew that, the next 4 days in a row, they're sleeping at school, like very heavily, very different than they're acting. So, something that looks like depression, but then might be just a physical factor to rule out. And then I think, kind of what I would also take away from here is just helping them get good sleep, healthy eating, things that's not going to like fix the depression, but the idea that we're kind of taking away those variables. Well, we're making sure it's not that if these other symptoms exist, then that might be leaning more towards depression. exercise, which I know is hard with the weather and with COVID restrictions. So there are a lot of good resources, maybe more for younger kids on, on YouTube, like little workouts they can do in the house, but just things to kind of get them up and going. Again, it's a little tough right now, everything. So if there's things that you're noticed that you are concerned, about some of the symptoms, some of the behaviors you're seeing, I think when talking with them, we're really making sure that the timing's appropriate. It's very difficult because we feel things very strongly when we're upset, when our child's upset and yelling, but that might be really the wrong time, because I think we say and do things that aren't helpful in the long run. So not doing it when we're upset or frustrated, or when they are. Asking, instead of asking, kind of here it says avoiding the why questions, asking, do you think that this is something that's been bothering you? You might get a lot of shoulder shrugs. That happens even to me, and I work with teenagers all the time. I don't know. And I think generally sometimes they don't know. But I think with why questions, we're definitely usually going to get like a shoulder shrug, or I don't know, because they might not know why they're feeling, depressed. Kind of using these I feel statements and observations. So, I feel a little concerned for you because I've noticed that you haven't been doing some of the things that you used to do that you really liked. So it kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off of them, and just saying like, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm noticing. You can let me know if I'm on the right track or not. It is also possible that, they might feel things that they're going to deny. I've had that with kids where we just kind of gently keep coming back to it every week when I see them. I know last week you said you weren't feeling that. Sometimes I use hypotheticals with them. I know you said you're not feeling depressed, you're not feeling these things, but what if you were? If you were, who would you talk to? What would you want to do? Because then it takes a little bit of the pressure, and they don't have to answer for themselves. They could answer hypothetically what they would do. But just trying to get them at least talking about it. Active listening is very difficult for all of us. But I think what we're meaning there is like not talking when they're talking, and not kind of trying to change what they're expressing. You might not understand their perspective. It's very likely that you won't, and that's okay. You're at least telling them, I'm listening to you, I'm listening to what you're saying. So when they say, I'm so upset that prom didn't happen this year, all those things, you don't say, well, I didn't even care about my prom. Again, that might be true. We say, that is a really big bummer. I know you were really looking forward to that. That's kind of the idea of active listening. So not trying to change how they're feeling, because we're really good as adults at doing that. Like, don't feel that, don't worry about that, just think this. And if it worked, things would be very different, right? And then I think don't be shy about using resources. School social worker, if they're in school, there are some school social workers that are still helping out with things, even though things are remote right now. You might homeschool your child, so maybe a school social worker is not as good of an option, but there might be someone, at the mental health agency for kids. A lot of times churches have like children's pastor or different, maybe like a therapist on staff. So just like feeling like there's nothing wrong. You're not a bad parent. You're not a bad caregiver. You're not a bad caring adult if you're reaching out to other people to help, because they might not feel comfortable to tell you for whatever reason, but they might feel comfortable to talk to their, teacher, things like that. So kind of maybe coordinating rather than outing them, like emailing the teacher, like, I think they're depressed. Can you talk to them? But saying like, I think that these things are here. I haven't gotten very far. Would you feel comfortable helping me talk to them or talking with them? And so, what we say is very important, but also how we act. That's the hard part for us too. But, I think modeling healthy choices in terms of, exercise, sleeping, all of those things. I think it's okay to share your feelings to some degree. Depends on their age, how much, but I think sometimes it's okay to say, I feel concerned and I don't know how to help you. That might be better to a 17-year-old than a 9-year-old, because they might say, well, yeah, when you do this, this actually helps. So I think just being honest about sometimes those things are okay. We don't have to have it all together. Usually the kids already know that we don't. So, I mean, we're not hiding anything from them there. And again, this is just a not as big a part of it. If you're kind of concerned, what do we do now? Consider expectations of them. They still need to do chores and whatever obligations are part of your household. But if they're involved, with extracurricular activities in 3 different sports, but then they're really low energy, they're suffering with depression, they can't do their schoolwork, we might, you might want to kind of change some of those things up. And so that we're maybe taking a little bit off their plate for them. Kids aren't always great at doing that for themselves. I don't think adults are either. So help them with that. And again, kind of if they can identify a safe person, whether that's you or someone else that's in the family, outside the family, I really think that gives them kind of someone that they can, that they can trust, that sometimes they can share more openly with. The one thing I found the most difficult when I was, again, in school was talking about suicide. It feels very awkward to look someone in the eye, someone you know and care about, and say, like, are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about harming yourself? It feels awkward. I do it a lot for my job and it still feels hard to say. But I would definitely suggest not to shy away from it. If you think that they're struggling with depression and you're maybe worried about their safety, suicide, I think we have this idea in our head. If I ask them, it's going to put that idea in their head. I think what it actually does is it takes a little bit of that pressure off. You've said that word. You've made it okay in a way to talk about. And again, they might not choose you as the person. It might feel awkward to talk with grandma about that. But you've at least put it out there that it's something that can be talked about. I think about this Mr. Rogers quote a lot. I get like a little choked up. I love Mr. Rogers, but he just said that emotions, I was going to write it down, you guys, and I didn't, but that feelings, different feelings we have are human. What's human is mentionable, and then what's mentionable is manageable. So this idea that if we can talk about something, a feeling, a thought, it doesn't make it instantly go away because we told our therapist or our mom or our teacher, but it makes it a little easier to manage. And then, the consideration here is the therapy, the medication piece. My job isn't to tell you if your kid's depressed, you have to put them on meds. It's something to consider. It's something to talk with your doctor about, and talk through those things and see, what you feel comfortable with and what you want to do. And sometimes being in the schools can be really pushy with parents about, well, you need to get them on a med. That's your right as a parent to decide. Do some research, talk with different people. It can be a really good option. Sometimes it doesn't feel as comfortable. That's okay. There's other options. Again, see here, the doctor, consult with a pediatrician, talk with the doctor. And then kind of the last piece that sometimes goes along with the depression is self-harm. And that can be really tough. Not all of self-harm is meant, for someone to, they're not always trying to die or to kill themselves. Some of that is kind of a way for them to deal with some of the emotional pain. This can be very difficult as a caring adult in a child's life to see and to, find witness to. So sometimes the cutting, burning, even taking things and scratching themselves, kind of writing into their skin. These are, some things we've seen that are really tough. But I think, again, to mention, the self-harm, to talk about it, to bring it up is going to be helpful. And it doesn't mean you have to, know exactly what to do. You might even tell them that if you notice this, hey, I didn't know what to do with this, but I do want us to talk to your therapist about this, or to talk to the social worker, because I want to help keep you safe. And again, self-harm can be really tough. A lot of kids feel a lot of shame and, can hide it. I would say there's certain behaviors sometimes with that. Like I've noticed kids when it's super hot outside and they're wearing long sleeves, just a red flag. Like, why are they? Some kids don't feel comfortable with their bodies, but that, has been times where they wanted to hide, cuts that they had and things like that. Again, I think it's okay to ask directly. To again, just it's mentionable. It makes it manageable. And then, if they've really badly hurt themselves, that might be when you call 911. If it's something that is a more superficial cut, maybe in that moment, you don't have to call 911 and make this big thing, but that we're going to tell them, hey, tomorrow we're going to, work on talking about this. We're not going to hesitate to reach out to ask about that. And then, just with suicide, if that's been mentioned, again, be more direct instead of like again, it's hard for us to say. It feels really awkward, but just to maybe ask directly, have you had any thoughts of hurting yourself or killing yourself? Again, that kind of gives them the permission to talk more freely, find out maybe what they're thinking. If they say, yeah, I thought about, using a gun, do you have guns in the home then? If they thought about a gun and they don't have a way to get to a gun, that's something that like, okay, we can maybe deal with this tomorrow or in the future. If they've said that, there's guns in the home, like making sure that those are in a safe place. That's something I think generally is a good idea, but just assessing kind of the risk right there. I don't want you to also feel like you have to do that alone. If you are not local to Topeka, there are, resources. We'll get to those at the end that you can call. But if you live in Topeka, you can call Family Service. We have a 24/7 crisis line. It doesn't mean if you don't feel like, I don't know what to do, I don't know if I want them to go to bed tonight, I can't keep them safe, call the crisis line. They'll help. It doesn't mean the child they have to be hospitalized. They have to be out of your home, any of that. Sometimes we can just talk about things. We can make an appointment the next day. It just depends on the situation, but I don't want you to feel like you have to do it all yourself. So there are some of the resources for Family Service, and we do have parent support, and that can be the parent of the child. You don't have to be mother or father if you were the guardian or the caretaker. Again, case management. There are other people like me that work in schools and things to help. We have therapy, and I'm going to be honest with you. Before I got in the field, I always thought, like, how does therapy help? Like, how does talking about this kind of make it better? It just seemed like I don't really see how these two things fit. But there's actually been research on this, just to show that therapy itself can actually impact some of those neural pathways in the brain, kind of help rewire things. But also, I think it helps parents and caregivers feel a little less guilty. If you're working with the therapist doing family therapy, kind of gives you more education and support. I think it gives more support to the kid to say, you're not in this alone. We're not in this alone. We can talk about some family stressors. And I think a lot of times it helps kids with just kind of the negative thoughts that they've been having. That's a lot of the stuff we work on in therapy and case management. But we've got those. There's a 24-hour, that's our 24-hour crisis number. There's an app. They have to be 13 to use it. Anybody can use that. And it's called 7 Cups, and that's kind of a way for them to chat privately if they're, having some thoughts and some things maybe they don't feel comfortable to talk with mom, dad, aunt about. They can use the 7 Cups. There is, a number for a national suicide prevention, line for them to talk. A lot of kids I have noticed this day and age don't feel as comfortable on the phone talking. They prefer texting or messaging. And as you can see with the crisis line below that, you can even text. A lot of times what they do is start the conversation via text and then can flip it to the phone. And then locally, we've got, like the ER and Stormont Vale has an inpatient unit. And so I've had kids that said, I can't be safe. Their parents said, I can't keep them safe, and we went to the ER as a way to kind of help them get into an inpatient unit for a couple of days where they could really, get things under control. I know that doesn't always feel comfortable. We're kind of like, oh, I don't know. But I think we'd rather, have them be safe. There's a couple websites there. Sorry, I skipped ahead. There too. And then, again, if you're local in Topeka, at Family Service, we're here. You can call and ask questions. A few more considerations. Oh, sorry, Don. Just that it can be okay as a parent or caregiver to feel frustrated. A lot of times it is frustrating, it feels confusing, it can feel a little overwhelming. So I really would encourage you to find support as well. Again, whether that's through school staff, your church, other people that have gone through this. I think that really is just helpful. It's not going to get fixed overnight. So sometimes it can feel very urgent to us, like we got to fix this now because we just found out about this. But I think the goal is really to help them have lifetime skills so that they're able to cope with this over a longer period of time. And with depression specifically, it's cyclical. I mean, we know that it comes in waves at times, even with medication and therapy. And that can feel really frustrating, I think, for the person suffering and for the, family members around them. Like, they were doing great yesterday. What's happening today? So I guess I wanted to leave you with that thought, that if you're kind of feeling frustrated about those things, like, that's pretty normal. And again, it's why support, I think, can really be helpful. So I could keep talking for another hour, but I won't. Pam will shut me off here. So that was kind of all the things I had so far. But
no, this was good. And I have not seen any questions yet. So if you have questions and you're still on, please do chat. Gosh, if I could talk, type them in the chat box. A couple of things. Just a quick reminder, if you need a certificate of attendance, please do type your first and last name and just the word certificate in the chat before you leave the meeting. And I was mistaken. So in case you want to go back and watch this or look at a slide, or if you know of someone who you think, oh my gosh, I know, my neighbor's kiddo's really struggling. Like I said, we will post this on the main FSGC page. When you go to fsgctopeka.com, in the top right-hand side of the website, there's a big blue button. Can't miss it. It says Parent Resources. If you click that button, that's where you can get this presentation, as well as all of our past presentations. That's where you can get access to that. One other thing I did want to share. Sarah, can you unshare your screen? Because I have something I do want to share with folks real quick. An opportunity. Thank you. Well, let's see if I can share it correctly. Okay. Yeah, technology sometimes is my friend. Can everybody see that Ask a Child Therapist graphic? Yeah? Okay. So right now, here at FSGC in Topeka, we have a limited time. It's a free opportunity for parents, caregivers, guardians. If you're worried about a young child, a teenager, you can reach out to us. And I'm going to scroll down here actually a little bit. That website there at the bottom. Whoops. Now that doesn't help. There we go.
Yeah.
There. We wanted to provide this free service, especially with COVID-19, and we know families are struggling. So the way this works, if you go to this website, we ask you to fill out a very brief form. We're not asking you for insurance information and whatnot, but we do ask for your contact information so that one of our clinicians, one of our therapists can call you and see how we might be able to help. So I wanted to make sure that I shared this with you because this will be available through the end of the business day on Friday, November 13th is what we had extended it to. So, encourage you to take advantage of that. And that is a phone call. I do want to share that with you. You don't have to come in. That is a phone call. Again, we are here to support and help kids who are struggling and families. Sarah, you talked about that, and I think you hit it on the head, because not only, is it about the kids, but, me being a parent myself, I look back and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I remember going, oh, I don't know what else to do. Having that support, that's what we're here for. And that's what we specialize in. So, just wanted to share that tidbit. Now I'm going to unshare this screen, hopefully, and see if we have any questions for you. Wow, they're letting you off the hook easy, Sarah.
You can always follow up with Pam later.
Yeah, well, yes, that is true.
Yeah.
And so here's the parting shot, Sarah. I went online at the advice of one of our viewers. So here's the quote, and I am so glad I've never heard this quote. So thank you, Sarah. Okay, anything that's human is mentionable. And anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we can talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. I cannot think of a better way to close out this session. So thanks so much to all of you for joining us. We hope you found it helpful. Sarah, great job. Thank you so much. And I
Thank you,
hope
guys.
you all stay well and take good care. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.